Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with two special guests, Connelly and Chief Nyamweya, who have created this great graphic novel called Trust. And Chief, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So I want you two to talk because I find the graphic novel itself is great, but want to also hear about the creative process. So give our audience a quick summary about what this graphic novel is about.
So Trust is really just a story about a young African woman who is trying to protect the ecological and cultural aspects of her community from big corporations and big centralized institutions that are coming in and taking those away. And throughout her journey, she learns about blockchain and uses that to protect her community. And so really, it's the story of one woman's learning journey as she goes through, learns about this incredible new technology, and then how she uses it in the community around her. So we've created this book and motion comic to help educate people around the world, but specifically young Africans about blockchain technology and how it can have an impact on their community and their world.
So you mentioned that there's a book and a motion comic. Why did you pick those particular formats?
The answer is very simple. Video is the most viral format of any media out there. There are more people that have seen Gangnam Style than have read, many of our favorite literary classics. So personally, I love the comics medium. But I also felt like if our goal was actually to reach as many people as possible, you wanted to make it as easy as possible for them to see it. And there's been a lot of gray area in comics ever since the internet came on board. And like how do we read comics? Because so much about comics was being able to see time and space, like on one page, being able to move backwards and forward in time through the panels. And that's very difficult to replicate digitally. So motion comics are a good way to do that. They are good like in between a full-on animation and a comic where you kind of display the panels in a creative way. And, you also have voice actors. We have a really stellar team of Kenyan actors. I'm very proud of the team, awesome producer. And yeah, it's really a wonderful, how do I say, collaborative process.
Interesting. So many questions. So I'm going to stick to, I guess, maybe a basic one. How did this partnership kind of form?
So Chief and I actually met in 2016 at Singularity University, which is a sort of learning center / think tank out of Silicon Valley. And their whole goal is to teach people how to use exponential technologies to solve problems that impact 1 billion people or more. So it's really looking at how do we use incredible technologies like VR, AI, nanotech, blockchain to create, scalable impact in the world around us. And so we attended a program that was about 10 weeks long. They had people from 80 countries around the world, entrepreneurs, impact professionals, investors, and we just learned about what was happening in the world around us and how we might be able to fix it. And then many of us started up companies together. And so Chief and I met there, but didn't really start this project until several years later in 2019, I guess it was. And just, thought, hey, this is a really incredible opportunity to take a celebrated graphic artist and a blockchain educator and throw them together and see what we could achieve.
Interesting. And I think something you said, Anne, but in terms of when you're describing the story, you kind of subtly hinted at blockchain, right? And it was very much a storytelling basis. So was that intentional on both of your parts in terms of, emphasizing the storytelling and the richness of the medium itself versus the emphasis on technology?
Yeah, I think the goal was always to get from 0 to 1. It would have been a tall order to really provide like a really detailed education. So it's just about showing what is this technology, how can it be used, and showing a few use cases, which is what we did. The most important use case being land titles and creating a land registry, but then there are also others. There's money transfer in there. There's a little bit of crypto and DAOs. Of course, DAOs show up a bit later. And all of the challenges, excuse me, you might be able to hear my family in the background.
All good.
It's bedtime hours here.
Yeah.
And basically embedding it in the context of someone's story. And I feel like that's the easiest way that people learn. It's the oldest mode that human beings have had for transferring information. It was a way of simulating dangers for like young children. You don't have to go out there and meet a dragon. I can just tell you a story about what it's like when you meet a dragon. And, with that simulation in your mind, you'll know what to do when you're in that situation. So I thought that was a really powerful way of doing it.
And that storytelling and your example of the dragon is so powerful, because I feel like one of the bigger issues we suffer in tech is obviously with the techlash that's been occurring over the past few years, is that we emphasize technology versus let's call it the humanistic impact of how technology can be beneficial. And it sounds like with Trust that both of you have kind of emphasized that the benefits of blockchain, right, versus a centralized, I'll politely call it bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it is blockchain technology and decentralization is all about giving people choice. You can choose a centralized model if that's what works for you, but for the vast majority of people around the world, it's not working. And so having these new models of governance and these new models of societal coordination and cooperation can dramatically change the outcomes for people. And so in the book, it's really about following her journey as she sees, the challenges that her community is facing under these centralized models where there's lots of corruption or lots of power that sits in the hands of very few, and looking back on historically how communities work together and how we've lost that. But how can you take what worked from those times and use technology to, make those philosophies and those ways of working functional in, the 2022, 2023?
I mean, that decentralized model, I mean, very much, both of you are in two separate locations. Chief, you kind of mentioned you brought in voice actors and other artists to work on the motion novel and the book. Walk me through that process. How did you find those people, and how did you all end up working together? I mean, Chief, you kind of mentioned the time zone difference there, as indicated with your family. So how did that work? How did you form?
Well, I mean, you need both. And if I can just touch on what Anne was talking about previously and your previous question about the humanistic element, it's obviously more challenging to look at something holistically from many different angles. Your reading has to be a lot broader. Your research has to be a lot broader. You cannot overlook political challenges with implementing solutions. A lot of the time, like in this city, for example, we have tons of software engineers. You have, an oversupply of people whose talents are wasted making, pizza delivery apps. But when it comes to things like government registries, it's impossible to implement them. And that's a political challenge because there are a lot of people who are beneficiaries of the inefficiency. They are beneficiaries of the bureaucracy. If I don't want you to find a certain land title, for example, I can just make it disappear. And there are people who can get paid to make a file disappear. That becomes a lot more difficult, when you have this system. So and that's what the story does. It shows you how these challenges emerge and how you'd have that difficulty, and and shows you that human element. Sorry, now just to skip forward to the question that you asked, how was it finding all these people? I benefited from working in this industry for about 10 years now or more. I say 10 years, but it's been longer. It's been a really long time. So I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and even before going to SU, I'd been in the animation community, and this was a wonderful project. We had wonderful partners who allowed us creative freedom. It's a sort of creative freedom that's really rare. A lot of the time when you work with some grant institutions, there's so much paperwork, so much bureaucracy. You find yourself rummaging through trash cans looking for boarding passes and receipts and stuff. But here there was so much creative freedom. They were just like, hey, if we can get this message out, there was an openness to the community, and they were blockchain agnostic. They didn't want you to necessarily promote one blockchain over another. They were happy to share that platform, understanding that, if the number of people who understand this technology grows, we all benefit. And I feel like it's a rare attitude. They're different type of people. They're not what I've been used to, working in terms of funding of the arts.
You make a very interesting point, Chief. You actually made a couple of interesting points, but I'm gonna focus on one, which is, that bureaucracy, right? It benefits a lot of people, that inefficiency, right? Whereas blockchain is more or less efficient. And that's one of the things I've always thought about. It's like, I come from an accounting background, and auditors are an important human step in terms of transparency and accountability. But with blockchain technology, you could potentially disintermediate those accounts, right? So how do you, I think maybe the question I'm trying to ask is, how do you think we change that mindset? I mean, obviously trust in terms of the novel and the motion graphic are one way, but how do we push that further and try to get more people on board that are like-minded, like the artistic community that went into the trust?
It's one of the greatest challenge with this technology, because it is, it's removing power from people that have it. And so they're of course not going to want to support that. And so that's where the beauty of it is, so much of what's being done and what's being built in the Web3 space is community driven. It really comes from the bottom up. It comes from people seeing a problem and trying to fix it. And I think what's going to happen in the longer term is that the alternatives are going to be so good that there'll be no viable reason for those in power to turn them down. Or if they do, these parallel systems will just spin up themselves, and it will completely dismantle the existing systems. And so, I think in order to get people on board, there's a few things. Education is one of the biggest ones. How do you overcome some of the stigmas that have been spun around Bitcoin and some of that technology? And then how do you get people to understand why this is so important? Like, I know for a lot of people that I speak to in Canada or in the United States, they don't understand why anyone would want cryptocurrency or blockchain technology. But when you can walk them through examples around, hyperinflation in Venezuela or in Zimbabwe, suddenly they see a use case for somebody. And then all of a sudden it starts to make a lot more sense to them as to why this isn't such an important technology. And so I think the more we can really drive educational initiatives, particularly in communities where the immediate need is there, where there's a problem that it immediately solves, I think is going to help dramatically move the adoption of this technology forward.
If I could just add to what Anne has said, I think the key thing is trust, which is why we titled the book Trust. And blockchain really shines in contexts where there's a trust deficit, where people cannot trust systems for one reason or the other. It might be human error, it might be failures in the past or whatever. If you cannot trust your currency to be of the same value tomorrow as it was yesterday, if you cannot trust the outcome of an election, if you cannot trust when there's that trust issue, then these technologies become extremely important. I've seen in my own country, we just concluded an election, and the whole world was so surprised. Oh, it was so peaceful, because we'd gotten a reputation for like post-election violence after 2007. But the key difference was that there was so much transparency with this one. The numbers were being uploaded instantly as they were coming out of each polling station, and everybody could see it, so that even if there was a dispute further down the line, there were no surprises. Whereas in the election that had violence happen at the end of the election, it was so murky. It was totally centralized, and they at some point kidnapped the head of the electoral commission and put him off in one room, and a result came out that nobody believed in. So when you have this trust, when people can trust the outcomes, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing, and I feel like I feel like we are really ready for it, and it speaks for itself.
I think I agree with both of you. I wouldn't necessarily agree ready, but I think we need it, right? I think what we're seeing around the world with central authority being undermined is critical, and having those alternative systems that act in a decentralized manner are going to be critical in the future. And Actually, let me ask you this question specifically about trust. How, obviously there are certain advantages, at least in the old world model of having centralized publishing and production. How are you two publicizing and getting the word out to get people to read this graphic, the motion graphic and the book?
So a lot of the promotion is very grassroots. We're working with partners from across the continent. So one of the things we're really proud of is we've got, I think, upwards of 10 different blockchain educational institutions across Africa, where our readers, once they finish reading the book or seeing the motion comic, can actually connect with these educational institutions and go on to learn, more in-depth developer training or entrepreneurship training. So working with them to reach their networks, working with our funding partners. So as Chief mentioned earlier, we've got funding from across the sector, Algorand, Cardano, Interchain Foundation, a number of others. So working with their media teams, and then working with local communications professionals just to help get the spread out on social media. And our goal is really, we want to reach 1 million young Africans and have them read the book or see the content, with the goal of really improving diversity in the blockchain space so that we can start to build better, more global applications.
Those are definitely noble goals and very interesting. And I think maybe the new way of publishing and promotions. And then Chief, I think as a follow-on to that, I have a lot of artist friends. They're not as technologically savvy as they could be, right? Their mixed medium is more traditional physical, right? It's the paints and the canvas, etc. From the artist community, how do you think they should evolve, or maybe the technology should evolve in order to address the need where like the artist can focus on their medium or the messaging in their art versus technology itself?
Well, thankfully, a lot of the tools I've been seeing are already doing that in a way. They're already bridging the distance. Like virtual reality, for example, I feel has really bridged the distance between physical sculpting, for example, and sculpting digital clay. Because before, when you were working on a 2D screen, using a software like ZBrush, it was there was a layer of abstraction there. You're working on a screen, maybe using a pen or something. But when you're in VR, you're actually sculpting, and the skills are a lot more transferable. It's a lot more intuitive for somebody who already has the skill with this medium. So the technology is taking care of that to some extent. Specifically about blockchain, there are great things being experimented with, like Decentraland. It's an interesting space. NFTs, of course, they have a lot of pros and cons, but I feel like these experiments are necessary in order for us to, not only in terms of the creation, but also finding new marketplaces and new ways of building communities. Obviously, there's the challenge that it demands that your audience now have crypto wallets, have Ethereum wallets a lot of the time, which your existing community might not have that. But those are things that, depending on how the technology advances and how awareness grows, it might, solve over time. But in a way, it also makes you more global as an artist.
I like that. I mean, I think, I kind of briefly mentioned Web3 and you've mentioned NFTs, Chief. I think what we're seeing, in my personal opinion, is that couple of things, right? In payments, in North America, we went from cash to check to card to, Apple Pay. Whereas in African countries, they skipped card, right? They went straight to mobile wallet, right?
They wouldn't give us credit cards, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's like 100% what we're seeing in the Web3 and in crypto or blockchain space is very much a synonymous with that. It's messy, but it's leading to something better. And I always like to say, to your point, Chief, about giving those easy to use tools to a broader audience. I think of, the internet back in the late 1990s, web developers are making six figures. Now, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get technology. It's like anyone can throw up a website in 5 minutes, right? And you don't have to pay a web developer unless you're doing something really complicated. So that's super interesting. Question to you both. If, I always like to leave the podcast commentary to our guests. So if you were to ask our audience what they could do either to promote trust or blockchain or even artists, Chief, you mentioned the globality of our artists. What would you say is the critical thing they could do in the next, let's say, 30 days?
I would say there's two things. Number one, go out and buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. So don't invest your money, invest your time, spend an evening learning how to open a wallet, how to get some crypto, and just, become a part of the blockchain community. And then once you've done that, take a look at our book. It's launching September 21st. It's totally free to access. It'll be available at trustgraphicnovel.com as well as across, Twitter and Instagram. And share it with your networks, particularly networks that you know of with African connections, African roots. But really, it's a great opportunity to also share incredible African art with an international community.
Very cool. Chief, what about you?
Read our book. I think that would be a wonderful start, and support art, support artists. It's not only good for the artists, it's also good for you. And we could not have more art. I think we have too little of it. We need more beauty in the world. We need more perspective, a lot more philosophical conflicts behind things, so that we are not only looking at the technical challenge. Because I think, especially when looking at something like blockchain, the challenge is not really technical. It's very political, because a lot of the time we know how to solve these problems. The problem is how do you get people to do it, and that's where artists come in, and storytellers in general. So we launch on the 21st of September, so just be looking out for it. The website is trustgraphicnovel.com.
Excellent. I love how you have emphasized the primacy of artists, because I 100% agree with you. Us techies are, I think, we get a little full of ourselves, but I think artists provide that impetus for innovation. So, and Chief, thank you again for joining the podcast.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
having
having
us.
us.